Speaker, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As we consider the nation's budget 2018-2019, there is an aspect of our beloved Bahamas we must consider, and that is the true state of our nation's soul. Inasmuch as we have embraced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as our God, much like Solomon in 2 Chronicles chapters 5, 6, and 7. Please take time out and read these chapters in the quietness of your chambers. Not only did Almighty God hear his prayer and petition, but he gave Solomon the solution to cure the sins of his people and the sins of all other subsequent nations who embraced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We, the Bahamian people, have embraced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as our God. Therefore then, 2 Chronicles 7, 12 to 14 are as to claim. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night, and said to him, I have heard thy prayer, and have chosen this place to myself for an house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven, if there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. Jeremiah 33, 3 and 6. Call unto me, I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things, which thou knowest not. Behold, I will bring it health and cure, and I will cure them, and will reveal unto them the abundance of peace and truth. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we give you thanks and praise, for you are good and your mercies endure forever. Wherein we as a people have sinned against thee, forgive us. Father, we are your people, and you have invited us to call upon you in the day of our challenges, and you will hear us and show us great and mighty things. We thank you for revealing to our leaders solutions to our nation's wide and varied challenges, including our future financial challenges. And we shall give you the praise and thanks for the wisdom and knowledge that you have downloaded into the hearts of our honorable leaders to bring our nation through the financial challenges which we face as a nation from this time forth and throughout 2019. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Honorable members, together we pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. On the earth. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. When the business of the House suspended last evening, the honorable member for North Eleuthera had taken the floor. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, I stood in to yield to the member for North Andres.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for North Andres.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank God for being able to stand here today and conduct the business of my constituents. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure. Mr. Speaker, the constituency of North Andres and the Berry Islands would like to also extend condolences to the family who have lost their loved ones during the Labor Day parade. Also to the family of little Mr. Cooper. Also, I would like to extend condolences to the Russell family in Losang, Andres, on the passing of Mr. Harrison Russell. And yesterday, also to the Barr family, who has lost their matriarch. May God continue to strengthen them as they go through their time of bereavement. Mr. Speaker, this year marks the Silver Jubilee of the North Andres and Berry Islands Regatta. And I would like to invite the entire Bahamas to attend and participate in this year's regatta festivities. As we pay homage to the great men and women that enrich our cultural experience. Mr. Speaker, for the first time ever in the history, the Berry Islands will be holding festivities from June 21st to the 23rd, which will end in Andres, North Andres, Morgan's Bluff, on the 6th of July to the 8th, where we will be hosting our regatta. I assure you that this year's regatta will be the best. Mr. Speaker, I am proud also to boast about the academic achievements of the people of North Andres and the Berry Islands, after I was so impressed with Lil Minnis. We have Chandra Evans of the Losang Primary School, who achieved the Gary Carter Scholarship. At the Clara E. Evans Primary School, Ms. Lachey Gator, who received the Bishop Ellis and Mother Daisy Farrington Scholarship. Mr. Dennis Adley was among the 25th place finalists who received a $2,000 scholarship from Mastic Point Primary School. And I'm not gonna brag or anything, but I am so proud because that's the school I attended. Bernice Knowles at Bertram A. Newton Primary School received a Bridge Authority Scholarship. Mr. Speaker, our young people are trailblazers and need to be acknowledged and celebrated. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to acknowledge and commend 4 bright and brave young men from my constituency. Mr. Farhan Winder, Mr. Terry Brennan from the Berry Islands, Mr. Colebrook, and Mr. Pickstork from North and South Mastic Point, who has dedicated their life to serve and protect our country by recently graduating from the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Congratulations, and continue to make our country a safe and peaceful place to dwell in. Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas is faced with a task. The task of creating a society that embraces and engages in the systematic growth and development of its citizenry and social structure, political and economic ideology, modern infrastructure, and advanced technology, and last but not least, cultural awareness. Mr. Speaker, our government seeks to move our society forward. Our commitment to the well-being of the Bahamian public remains steadfast, tangible, and a priority. And toward that end, Mr. Speaker, we seek to achieve a number of objectives, such as an overall reduction in the cost of food. We continuously strive to endure the healthy options are available to the widest cross-section of the Bahamian public. And last but not least, it is our mandate to support the development of a healthy population. Our mandate remains clear, Mr. Speaker. It is to achieve an acceptable level of food security in the short and long term by strengthening and supporting the Bahamian farmers, by providing education and training opportunities across the sector of every level, and by targeting cutting-edge research. Mr. Speaker, it is critical. It is a critical component of our agenda. That is why the Bahamas Agriculture and Marine Science Institute, better known as BAMSI, in the upcoming fiscal period, BAMSI will experience a transformation of sort as it undergoes radical reshaping to better position the Institute so that it will be more effective, transparent, fruitful, and dynamic, where the pursuit of an economical, sustained vision is paramount, as well as a greater oversight and expenditure of the people's money. Mr. Speaker, as the people of my constituency, the Great North Andros and the Berry Islands, as well as Bahamians across this archipelago, have been asked to increase their fiscal responsibility as our government tried to right so many wrongs. Mr. Speaker, BAMSI likewise will face increased management controls to reduce wastage during the upcoming fiscal period and beyond. Mr. Speaker, there are three pillars of BAMSI: the research, the tutorial farm, and the academic arm. On the ground in North Andros, many changes are expected to take place in the short and medium terms. The research development farm is being remodeled with a view of revving up production of semi-commercial crops such as lettuce, bananas, papayas, coconut, and pineapples. based on the addition of an increased number of acreage of these crops. BAMSI's economic dependence on the government will effectively be reduced. Mr. Speaker, it is anticipated that going forward, each year of successful operation will see a decrease in the need for external funding and allow for BAMSI to become increasingly economically self-sufficient. Particularly, Mr. Speaker, in the District of North Andros, the regularized and efficient operation of BAMSI will serve as an icon of success, which the people of North Andros can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, today, the BAMSI Institute, with its campus located in North Andros, has experienced a total enrollment of close to 300 students, with 34, Mr. Speaker, graduates. Mr. Speaker, the Institute is on track to provide a fall 2018 incoming cohort of some 100 students focused on the disciplines of agriculture, marine science, aquaculture, agribusiness, and last but not least, environmental science. It is expected to be the largest enrollment class since the Institute opened its doors in 2014. Mr. Speaker, we also expect to enroll for the first time, Mr. Speaker, international students during the upcoming academic year, which will further the support legitimacy of the academic institution, establishing it as a credible institution within the field of education. Mr. Speaker, courses of the institution continue to expand and diversify as the dreams of the young Bahamians are being met. And almost 1,000 Bahamians have been able to take advantage of the short course, workshops, and training opportunities offered through the Institute. Mr. Speaker, it is also important to note at this juncture that BAMSI is now registered with the Bahamas Ministry of Education's National Accreditation and Equivalency Council. This is a statutory body established under the National Accreditation and Equivalency Council. It is responsible for the registering and accrediting primary schools, secondary schools, post-secondary schools, and any institution or provider that offers training in the Bahamas. I move to the Associated Farms program. Mr. Speaker, with an established presence in New Providence, North and South Andros, Eleuthera, Exuma, Long Island, and Acklands, the impact of BAMSI is far-reaching and continues to grow as we connect with farmers and also place agricultural offices throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I think there is a misconception among the public that BAMSI is, in some cases, edging out the Bahamian farmers as it brings fresh produce to the market. But Mr. Speaker, the reality of BAMSI's mandate, however, can be seen in the Associated Farmers Program. Through this program, we support Bahamian farmers in a tangible way with a wealth of resources and inputs, offering guidance, technical support, and training, and also a ready market for their produce. Mr. Speaker, recently implemented changes within the AFP are producing more acceptance in local farming communities, where farmers were used to certain measures, processes, and outcomes. We are expanding the Bahamian farmers' outlook on what produce to grow, when to harvest, and how to grow or produce crops to meet the demands of a market whose tastes are evolving. We are maximizing a return on their investment. Mr. Speaker, at the research or demonstration farm in North Andres, Bahamian farmers can now see the efficient production system to grow papayas and bananas commercially. Local farmers can see successful hydroponics grow-out system. And before 2019, an aquaponics operation where both vegetables and fish are harvested will be ongoing. Mr. Speaker, while the production side of the Bahamian agriculture sector is being beefed up, the distribution chain from production of consumption is also being improved. Mr. Speaker, BAMSI staff and local farmers are taking note of post-harvest management to cut wastage. Beyond the production of crops, BAMSI is also helping local farmers learn new production systems for the rearing and housing of sheep and goat. BAMSI purebred livestock herds are now poised for distribution. Let me say that again, distribution. Within the next 3 months to revitalize the sheep and goat herd of our farmers. Mr. Speaker, this will introduce new genetics to the field and as a result, further improve the income of local farmers at the market. Mr. Speaker, the BAMSI brand also targets processed and manufactured food items. We are leading the charge in the acceptance of local produce, fruits, vegetables, and preserves like jellies, jams, and sauces. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians crave BAMSI because of what it is becoming. Together, all of these measures are resulting in increased local food production. And in time, will translate into a substantive reduction in this nation import food bill. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the road works in North Andros. Mr. Speaker, North Andros is still undergoing a massive amount of road works. The project encompasses 25 miles of settlement roads. Roads in Mastic Point, Nicholstown, and Kongstown. The project also calls for the replacement of 90,000 linear feet of water mains, together with 580 new lateral connections to all homes in the mentioned settlements, inclusive of Pineville, together with installation of hydrants in various locations. Mr. Speaker, to date, the construction company had completed 80,000 feet of the water mains installation. It's 87%, together with approximately 200 lateral connections. Mr. Speaker, after communicating with the contractor, he anticipates completing all water main works within this month. Testing of the mains will add another 3 to 4 weeks to full completion. They have carried and placed in excess of 75,000 cubic yards of limestone fill, leaving only to reshape and final compaction and grading upon passing the water pressure, the water pressure test requirements of the Water and Sewage Corporation before paving commence. Mr. Speaker, paving will involve placing some 30,000 tons of asphalt, which is expected to take 4 months to complete. Paving is anticipated to begin in Mastic Point before the end of this month. And it is anticipated that all of the settlements will be completed by the end of October this year. Mr. Speaker, of a particular note, we have recently completed the construction and paving of 19 miles of 24-foot width highway to Stafford Creek Bridge, together with 20 miles of settlement roads, and I know the member for Central Andros and Mangrove Key would enjoy hearing this. Completed 20 miles of settlement roads in Central Andros, with striping is scheduled to begin in 30 days. This is the people's government. Mr. Speaker, and yet there are still a lot of work that needs to be done, like paving of Fire Road to and beyond the new school complex, Red Bay Road's reconstruction, Bark Road reconstruction, the construction of seawalls in Stafford Creek, South Mastic Point, and Kongstown, Pineville Road's repaving, Stanley Creek Road improvements. Mr. Speaker, an island is like a plant. It consistently needs to be nurtured in order for this to blossom and bear fruit. For far too long, family islands have been mismanaged and allowed to be deteriorated. No more. No more, Mr. Speaker. I would be remiss to mention the state of despair that the great people of the Berry Islands who suffer daily as to endure. Mr. Speaker and members of Parliament, I pledge to you on this day that every contribution I make in this honorable House, that it will plead to the plight of my people. Because as a people, we have suffered long enough. And it is time for major upgrades to our water system, roads, electricity, and government complex that has gone to waste. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine the nightmare of sharing current still exists? 3 hours in Master Point, 3 hours in Low Sound, 3 hours in Nicholstown. But I am happy to say today, Mr. Speaker, after speaking to the Minister of Works, the Member of Parliament for Carmichael, a son out of the garden of Stanley Creek, Andros, that relief is very, very soon to come in the near future. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would also like to announce, after a long-awaited 40 years, Mr. Speaker, inside of an airport terminal where it is dilapidated, the Berry Islands will soon be getting its new airport terminal. Mr. Speaker, the Berry Islands will soon be getting its new airport terminal after 40 years. In the Berries. This is what I call good government. This is what I call the people's time. Mr. Speaker, BTVI, now I'm an advocate for this. BTVI is one that helped me here today. And they are offering classes, listen to this, in North Andros. And I am happy to say that the residents in North Andros are taking full advantage of the courses that they are offering. We have some 89 plus students are already enrolled. And with our government mandate to offer scholarships for persons willing to advance their education or field of work can attend BTVI, not in Nassau, but at home, where we can keep our people home in North Andros. And I am certain our numbers will triple. Mr. Speaker, Proverbs 27 verse 7 says that a borrower is a slave to the lender. Mr. Speaker, if we are going to make our Bahamas a better place, educating our people and lowering the deficit goes hand in hand. Mr. Speaker, reality is that building a stronger Bahamas starts now. As we tighten our economic belts and hamper down for a common good, which is ultimately be a well-balanced, thriving force for social and economic stability. Mr. Speaker, Mr. William Lyon Mackenzie once said, and I quote, "Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to government and recognized as its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talks of sovereignty, of parliament, and of democracy is idle and futile." Mr. Speaker, as a nation, we have to build a better way of life where there can be hope for our children, and where one day, Mr. Speaker, their dreams will become reality. Mr. Speaker, the road to that dream starts now. Mr. Speaker, and I have no doubt in my mind that there is no man I trust. Listen to me carefully. There's no man that I trust to steer this country at this pivotal point other than our leader, our Prime Minister, the Honorable Hubert Alexander Minnis. Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that he was blessed for this time. You see, when you can give up self-interest and personal views and put country first, it comes with great sacrifice and great public scrutiny. And Mr. Speaker, it is truly commendable. Mr. Speaker, it is our job as statesmen and women, to legislate the future to ensure that we still have a country that we can be proud of, and a country that we can call our own. Mr. Speaker, great leaders Mr. Speaker, make great sacrifice without the fear or worry of political persuasions or interference. Mr. Speaker, as a little boy growing up in the settlement of Mastic Point, my father always told me, in life we make many sacrifices. As long as it's in the best interest of people, you will always be loved and remembered long after you leave this earth. Today, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the people of North Andros and the Berry Islands for giving me the opportunity to be their voice in this honorable place, to voice their concerns that are long overdue after years and years of neglection. We can truly see the strive now in the sleeping giant. We can now see in North Andros and the Berry Islands hope. Faith has been restored into those people. And we all know faith is a substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. But I assure you that as the years go on, I believe in this government that we will have a better day, that the future is bright for our little kids, where their dreams can become reality, and to build this nation to be a stronger nation. May God bless you, honorable members in this house. May God bless the people in North Andros and the Berry Islands, and by extent, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Trailblazer of St. Barnabas.
Yes, please. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I still constantly believe that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is the greatest nation on earth. I offer my condolences to the family members of those who lost their lives during the Labor Day March, as well as to the family of young Cameron Cooper. May God continue to watch them, console them, and guide them during this difficult time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of my extended family, the good people of St. Barnabas, grateful that they have accepted me as their own, and I will forever be humbled that they have chosen me to serve them. Thank you. I give thanks to Almighty God, who has allowed my life to be a testimony of failures and victories, struggles and triumphs, to the glory of his name, and hope that it serves as an example that his redeeming love is quantified in the loving and limitless mercy he provides. Mr. Speaker, as I prepare to contribute to this budget and consider our country's economic future, I analyze the data, the options, possible outcomes of each, and yes, the hard choices that we face as a people in this moment, and was overcome by a resolve that I bring to this honorable House and this debate this morning, that I will not retreat from, and that my conscience and my conviction has cemented in my heart and in my mind. That resolve has led to one determination, Mr. Speaker. I have a duty to act because the Bahamas must succeed. Mr. Speaker, as I stand here today as a member of this honorable House, it never escapes my consciousness that for good or for bad, my words will have resonance across our Bahama land. So I work feverishly in my own imperfections, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that my thoughts, my words, always reflect thoughtfulness, honesty, humility, and love of my people and my country that I truly hope is seen in both my personal and political life. After all, Mr. Speaker, as I often say, I am just an ordinary man trying to do some extraordinary things for the people of St. Barnabas, the Bahamian people, and indeed the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Since I became a candidate over a year ago, I came to realize even more that the frustration with the apparatus of government and the politics extended way beyond the constituents of my beloved St. Barnabas and was not confined to any political party, F&M or PLP. All across our Bahama land, Bahamians from all walks of life constantly express their dissatisfaction in our politics and how it slows the function of government and its ability to bring real transformation to the lives of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, politics, or should I say, petty politics, has been the greatest obstacle to reform and real change in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And if we are serious about our obligation to our nation, serious about our commitment to the Bahamian people, we would take stock, hold ourselves into account, and change how we conduct ourselves and how we do the people's business. Mr. Speaker, I heard a sentiment some time ago, which I wish to apply here this morning. Mr. Speaker, there is not an F&M Bahamas, there is not a PLP Bahamas, there is the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I submit these thoughts for us to consider as we debate this very important budget, keeping in mind that these debates in recent times have been littered with political ploys dressed up as principled positions. We must elevate this debate on the economic prospects for our country, because if we continue to focus, Mr. Speaker, on the thought of losing a political fight, we put ourselves, our people, in jeopardy of losing our country to an uncertain future. Mr. Speaker, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas must succeed. There will be some that will say, Mr. Speaker, as I often say, that I am naive. But as I've said in response to that, Mr. Speaker, I am not naive about the political realities we face, but I do know that those realities have been created by us, just as the solutions to our country's most pressing problem, and in this sense, our fiscal state, the solutions reside within all of us. Mr. Speaker, we must act decisively, and we must act now. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that we are in a moment of great testing, but in singular moments like this exists a far greater opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, at the end of this budget, it is well within our reach. Today marks this annual exercise to put down a deposit on securing our country's future prosperity and future generations of Bahamians. So, Mr. Speaker, before I get into the merits and tough choices within this budget, I wish to attempt to illustrate and describe the elements, the environment that I humbly feel have come to temper and color this debate, whether by consequence and time or otherwise manufactured. I've chosen to start here not for any dramatic effect or ego-filled attempt to grandstand, but merely to communicate to the people of St. Barnabas and Bahamians alike in an honest, patriotic, sincere, and real way about my belief in the magnitude of this moment and what could possibly lay ahead on the other side of this budget debate and what it means for our children and future generations of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, anemic growth, ballooning debt, massive deficits, downgrade after downgrade, unemployment, uninspiring economic outlooks, and an uncertain future. Are we not tired, Mr. Speaker? Doesn't each of us feel that the Bahamian people who we serve deserve better? I do, and I will fight so that better comes for the Bahamian people because, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas must succeed. Mr. Speaker, Bahamian families every day with their household budgets are forced to make difficult and painful choices that they don't like for the survival of their families. Mr. Speaker, likewise, it truly pains me as I think about some of the hard choices in this budget. Mr. Speaker, like so many of my colleagues, I don't like it. No one does. But it must be made for the long-term survival of the Bahamian economy and our children and our grandchildren's future. Not every decision that is made in life you will enjoy making, Mr. Speaker, but you know that it must be done. Mr. Speaker, I saw some strong words leveled at the hard choices we've had to make in this budget. Mr. Speaker, I am obligated as a son of this Bahamian soil, as a representative of 5,148 Bahamians in the constituency of St. Barnabas, as a member of this honorable house, to do not what is politically convenient, to do not what is easy, but to do what is right for those 5,148 people in St. Barnabas and all Bahamians. Not to act in this moment would be to use those strong words, treacherous, reckless, and dangerous. Mr. Speaker, whenever my season is up in this honorable place, I want my God, my 3 daughters, the people of St. Barnabas, Bahamians everywhere, and my conscience to note, Mr. Speaker, that I not only served, but I succeeded on behalf of the Bahamian people. After all, Mr. Speaker, why do we assemble in this place? Mr. Speaker, I'm going to forgo the formality of my contribution for a moment. I think, Mr. Speaker, that it is clear that members of this honorable house have probably made up their minds and have decided and solidified a stance on this budget. So who I really want to talk to right now in this moment, Mr. Speaker, are the Bahamian people, the thousands of Bahamians who understandably have questions and concerns, and who really want to know how this budget affects their future. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about the taxi driver who is waiting right now on his next job. I'm talking about that young student who's getting ready for that final exam, who simultaneously is thinking about their future. I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about the small businessman. I'm talking about that lady who doesn't have enough to take care of her medical bills, Mr. Speaker. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, let us imagine a Bahamas. Imagine a Bahamas not saddled with debt, Mr. Speaker. Let us imagine a Bahamas where Bahamian graduates are clamoring to come back home because opportunities are abound. Let us imagine a Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, where no longer Bahamians need cookouts and steakouts and salsas to fund their medical bills. Let us imagine a Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, where the revitalization of the Over the Hill brings forth superb economic growth, where Over the Hill now becomes a tourism mecca. Let us imagine, Mr. Speaker, let us imagine all of the possibilities. Let us imagine a more secure Bahamas, a more secure territorial waters. Imagine a place like that, Mr. Speaker. Imagine a Bahamas. You know, Mr. Speaker, right now in Princess Margaret Hospital, there's a mother, and she's holding her child, and the father is across the room, and he's looking at his family, and the mother is cradling that child, and she is thinking about all of the possibilities that she wants for her firstborn. All of the possibilities, Mr. Speaker. That child, her son. I want to be sure, Mr. Speaker, that 16, 17 years from now, 16, 17 years from now, when that little boy gets older, I want to be sure that should he see me 16, 17 years from now, and he says, Mr. Cartwright, in 2018 when I was born, you had an opportunity to change the direction of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I want to be able to say to that young man that it was a pleasure that I was able to secure a future for you and for my children. Mr. Speaker, a couple of years ago, I have an 18-year-old daughter, twin girls who are 16. They're doing their exams now at St. Augustine's College, so I wish them well. We had a conversation, and I dare say that our children are more perceptive than we are, smarter than we are, and that's okay. But we had a conversation about sacrifice, because my daughters always hear me talk about this life mantra that I have, this mantra that you must live for something bigger than yourself. So we talked about sacrifice. And so I said to my daughters, if I could be sure, I said, if your father could be sure of two things, and God take my breath away, and I say that to this day, if I could be assured of two things and God takes my breath away, one would be that my daughters fulfill their God-given purpose in this life and have grandchildren and have children, and that my country will fulfill its greatness. Mr. Speaker, if I could be assured of those two things, I have no issues with God taking my breath away. That's how much I love my country. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's deal with the proverbial elephant in the room, okay? The politics. Politics that unfortunately overshadows a lot of the things that we do as legislators and many things that we do in this country. Now, let me say this, Mr. Speaker. I believe that the members opposite love this country just as much as us. Yes. I will never question that. And I will never engage in anything that suggests that they don't. But because I believe that, the tough decision that the former administration had to make in 2015 on the implementation of that was a tough decision. But they did it because they love the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and they thought it was in the best interest of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Likewise, the hard choices that we have to make in this budget, Mr. Speaker, is for the future of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and it's gladly a choice I will make. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be very direct with this. If maybe there will be a political price for the hard choices that has to be made at the end of this budget. Maybe I will have to pay that political price. But I tell you this, Mr. Speaker, I would rather pay that price than the heavy price that the Bahamian people will have to pay should I not make that choice. This is not about politics for me, Mr. Speaker. This is about my country. And so, if for my country to succeed, I have to suffer a political loss, then let it be because of the love I have for this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, politics is so funny. And for those who've been around a long time, they get this. Even with all of the programs that I'm putting, that the team, I should say, is putting in St. Barnabas, and all of the different ways we're trying to improve their lives, politics is so funny. And the people have the right to decide what they want to do. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, sometimes good MPs lose, and sometimes good governments that make the right decisions lose. Yeah. So, I stand on that, Mr. Speaker. I believe that these hard choices have to be made for the future of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, No single aspect of government is more consequential to the transformation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, or a nation, than its budget and its economy. It is the vehicle by which a nation in so many ways fulfills its promise. In the application of its individual and collective parts, the nation's budget creates the environment for dreams and aspirations of the Bahamian people to come to life. So here we are yet again, Mr. Speaker, a new government, a new opposition, another budget debate, another chance to finally be courageous, get it right, and put the Bahamian people and the country that we all love on the road to real prosperity. But lurking in the proverbial bushes, Mr. Speaker, waiting to pounce and derail this budget, is political expediency and his friends, the status quo, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these two have worked together for decades, paralyzing governments and ultimately depriving the Bahamian people of meaningful economic progress. Mr. Speaker, let it end in this debate. Can we set aside our political swords and fix things? We are better than this, Mr. Speaker. We are not powerless in affecting our future. It is time to get it right for the Bahamian people. As representatives of the Bahamian people, will we allow our conscience to yield and give way to our personal political agendas? Now let me say, Mr. Speaker, I'm not suggesting that every critique or concern about this budget is based on politics. Each and every Bahamian has a right to ask and challenge any aspect of a budget that is meant for their benefit. What I am saying, Mr. Speaker, is that for too long this exercise has become more and more political. And based on the initial throes of this debate, it seems to be headed down the same path yet again. A path I refuse to walk, Mr. Speaker. I love my country too much. It would be treasonous, in my view, to know that we can avert an economic disaster and I not act. It is time that we make things right for the Bahamian people because, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas must succeed. We must realign and reshape our fiscal landscape because the hopes and dreams of the Bahamian people are lying in the balance. Often, Mr. Speaker, I submit that often throughout our history, the battle between political interests and the interests of the Bahamian people were unfortunately at odds. What has been physically prudent, good, and proper for the long-term stability and sustainability of the economy and our people have taken a bow and a back seat to a political strategy of win now and fix the fundamentals of the economy later. The results, Mr. Speaker, political parties win and the Bahamian people lose. Mr. Speaker, I will not do a disservice to the Bahamian people and my own sense of statesmanship by continuing to assign blame and use productive energy rehashing who engaged in neglect and mismanagement. Mr. Speaker, our present fiscal standing did not just happen overnight, and it won't be fixed overnight. It will be a process, as has been stated by the member for East Grand Bahama, the Minister of Finance. It did not happen by accident. We've not gotten here by choices we have made, even with the best intentions of previous administrations. We know our issues did not just emerge on May 10th of last year. Our problems stems decades. Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that we can no longer afford to do what we have been doing. We hear it often, Mr. Speaker. Governments are continuous. Administrations leave unfinished plans, and another reap the benefits and inherit the challenges. Our job as a government is to act, and act in a way that we feel will secure our future prosperity and create a better life for Bahamians everywhere. Mr. Speaker, we must move forward, and the Bahamas must succeed. Mr. Speaker, as I turn to the substance of this budget and some highlights, I wish to restate the words of the Minister of Finance in his communication last week. And I quote, "It is arguably the most transformative budget in the history of our nation. It is a budget about finally putting an end to past practices of fiscal mismanagement." With that as a backdrop, Mr. Speaker, this budget, I believe wholeheartedly, will enable us to get on the right track to start on the journey to real, sustained prosperity. It involves historic initiatives, long-desired controls, planning. Yes, Mr. Speaker, unfortunate, uncomfortable, but necessary decisions and much needed relief for the people of St. Barnabas and the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people should be upset. They should be frustrated. Everybody in here, including persons here in this gallery and persons on the outside of this honorable place, they should be frustrated and uneasy because it shouldn't have gotten to this, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt about that. This is not easy. I know for a fact that this is not easy for the member of Kalani, the Prime Minister of this country. This is not easy, but it's something that has to be done because the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, must succeed. We need sound finances for our country to live up to its promise and nourish the dreams of the Bahamian family and the ideas of the Bahamian entrepreneur. This budget, I believe, Mr. Speaker, will strengthen the structural foundation of our fiscal house. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Barnabas applauds the Prime Minister's vision and this government's historic commitment to them in the tune of $5 million through the Over the Hill initiative. Never before has a government devoted so much care and attention to these communities. They are delighted that their government cares about them and has literally devoted human and financial resources to this commitment to ensure the success of this project. More than just dollars, Mr. Speaker, more than just dollars and cents, this initiative represents an acknowledgement by this government that the future economic prospects for the Bahamas must involve the development and revitalization of the Over the Hill area. The objectives of social and economic empowerment, rejuvenation, smart and green technology, and youth and elderly empowerment will be entrenched and impact Bahamians in the Over the Hill areas for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, on August 1st, the burden of VAT on breadbasket items will be lifted. A welcome relief, Mr. Speaker, to many Bahamians, including many people in my constituency of St. Barnabas, many of whom live day to day and survive off breadbasket items every single day, Mr. Speaker. I come into contact with my people every day, Mr. Speaker, who wish that their walk to the grocery store for a loaf of bread, a stick of butter, and fresh milk would cost a little less. Sometimes I see mothers every week, Mr. Speaker, with their babies in hand who express how they have to literally count pennies to get baby formula and baby cereal. Mr. Speaker, these are real stories for my people, and taking VAT off of breadbasket items will have a real impact on their lives. This budget does that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, weekly I come into contact with constituents, middle-aged women, battling cancer, kidney disease, other terminal and chronic illnesses, and they show me their prescriptions, Mr. Speaker, that they cannot, in some cases, fill because of cost. The elimination of VAT on medications will offer them, and many others, Mr. Speaker, relief. This budget does that, Mr. Speaker. Just as important as those women, in this fiscal year, they will be able, Mr. Speaker, to benefit from the introduction of the first phase of catastrophic care insurance, of the first phase of the catastrophic insurance plan under NHI. In his communication, the Minister of Finance emphasized that this policy would extend real and tangible critical health care coverage to Bahamians throughout the country. I would add to that it will extend the life of many Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, every Bahamian has a family member or friend dealing with a major illness and is unfortunately quite aware of the medical bills that pile up because of the lack of insurance. The catastrophic care insurance seeks to provide help. This budget does that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the most inspiring interactions that I'm honored to have as a member of Parliament is with the many brilliant college graduates looking to start their professional careers and young Bahamians ripe with ideas who have tapped into the Bahamian entrepreneurial spirit both of whom are frustrated because of lack of opportunities and support in their zeal to act on a business idea, but just need a hand. Mr. Speaker, that hand will come in a number of initiatives. $4 million is earmarked for the public sector Young Professional Recruitment Initiative, where 200 new or recent college graduates will be recruited into the public service. Mr. Speaker, $5 million has been set aside to invest in entrepreneurship and small business development through micro and small loans and government guarantees with commercial loans. This budget does that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, home ownership is the single biggest investment young Bahamians can make and start their families, and it is essential that part of both economic development and national development. Economic, because construction spurs economic growth, and national development, because young families are making long-term commitment. They would be making a long-term commitment to their country through home ownership. This government will continue to aid Bahamians in the dream of owning their home by extending, for 5 years, the first-time homeowner stamp tax exemption. Mr. Speaker, this government has set out a robust plan in the budget to address one of the biggest impediments and obstacles to securing our economic future. Our debt, Mr. Speaker, our borrowing policies must be checked. We cannot continue to borrow indiscriminately and mortgage away our children's future. The plan of establishing a public debt management unit and a public debt management committee to monitor government borrowing is a necessary control strategy. This budget addresses that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no budget is perfect, and neither is this one. Yet, even in its imperfection, I believe that it has the capacity to be transformative. It has taken a balanced approach of providing meaningful incentives and relief to the Bahamian people, committed funding to necessary development initiatives while making some unfortunate and difficult choices that time and circumstance has brought before us. And, Mr. Speaker, the need to act has been met with the will to act for the betterment of the Bahamian people and our country. This, I truly believe, Mr. Speaker. The need to act has been met with the will to act for the betterment of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to the Bahamas Public Parks and Public Beaches Authority, where I serve as Executive Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that it can be talked about enough, but we truly have a serious problem with pride in our country. We deface our landscape. We continue in the indiscriminate dumping and littering. Where is our pride, Mr. Speaker? Do we understand that when the tourist walks off the ship and they see littering, that they say that's a reflective of a people? Do we understand that, Mr. Speaker? Let us take pride in this country that we love. Let us take pride, Mr. Speaker. I wish to thank the hard-working team at the authority for their commitment. They continue to work hard every day on the streets of New Providence and in our open spaces, Mr. Speaker. We are working along with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, who've been exceptional in their assistance in reining in littering and dumping culprits that continue to deface our landscape and open spaces. Mr. Speaker, we are presently engaged in a second installment of removing unauthorized and expired signs around the island. Also, Mr. Speaker, tree trimming exercises have started around the island in preparation for this year's hurricane season, and we pray to God that the Bahamas will be spared again. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Public Parks and Public Beaches Authority will be engaging over the next several months on the restoration of infrastructure and playground equipment on the 130 parks around the island of New Providence. In addition, further restoration of roundabouts, sculptures will be completed in the next few weeks. Mr. Speaker, the authority is looking forward to the acquisition of additional large pieces of equipment, such as industrial ride-on mowers and an industrial beach cleaner to aid in the efficient and timely cleaning of our beaches and open spaces. Mr. Speaker, the authority continues to work strategically on behalf of the Bahamian people and remains proactive and responsive to the concerns that they may have. Mr. Speaker, I would be guilty of a dereliction of duty if I did not apprise my 5,148 family members in St. Barnabas of two very important initiatives that are on their way to assist us in the further development of St. Barnabas. Mr. Speaker, we are just weeks away, barring any unforeseen circumstances, from securing the St. Barnabas Community Center. It will be the centerpiece of our plans for the constituency with religious, educational, cultural, and development programs. Mr. Speaker, long-term development requires long-term planning, so I'm enthusiastic to announce that the St. Barnabas Development Foundation is on its way. We want sustained progress, so it requires a sustained commitment, Mr. Speaker. The foundation will allow us to mobilize resources and engage other forms of assistance in a structured way. The people of St. Barnabas are grateful for recent government partnerships that continue to work hand in hand with our already diverse and meaningful program schedule for the people of St. Barnabas to enjoy. We thank the Ministry of Works and the Member of Parliament for Jamaica for the ongoing paving of many roads throughout the constituency, including Farrington Road and Corridor Avenue in the Grove. We salute with much appreciation the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture and the member from Marco City for their Culture in the Park initiative. It was a smashing success, and we hope to do it again in the very near future. Mr. Speaker, BAIC's pop-up market brought fresh produce at a sharply reduced price to our constituency, and we thank the member for Golden Gates for his vision of ensuring access to these homegrown, affordable products. Mr. Speaker, the St. Barnabas Urban Renewal continues to be a vital social assistance mechanism, and in so many ways acts as the government's conscience in St. Barnabas, staying in touch with the vulnerable and those in great need throughout the constituency. We are thankful to the member for Seabreeze and her team for their important presence to the people of St. Barnabas. People of St. Barnabas, I want you to know that I remain here for you. Your interest is mine, and your struggles are mine. We will succeed together, and I will continue to work for you. St. Barnabas, I have your back. As I close, Mr. Speaker, I wish to turn my attention back to our purpose here today. The budget is a document, a fiscal blueprint, but it must be executed in all its parts by all the stakeholders: government, business, churches, civic organizations, and most importantly, the Bahamian people, young and old. As a parliamentary body, we must decide right here, right now, if we as one unified nation will allow Bahamian history to reflect that we squandered our talents, our capacity, our abilities, our know-how in terms of addressing our fiscal issues as a people, or will we allow it to reflect that we stood up and selflessly rejected our own inclinations, political expediency, and political biases for the sake of country, for a promising and prosperous future for our children? Will there be embedded into the history books, Mr. Speaker, that this was a time like no other, when we would shape our destiny and not have our future shaped by how we lacked fortitude, how we lacked courage, how we lacked the will to do what must be done? Mr. Speaker, we are at that crossroad again, faced with a harsh reality. Do we as a nation care enough not to mortgage away the future of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Mr. Speaker, I support this budget for the young family in Watling Street in the Grove. I support this budget for the lady battling cancer in Big Pond. I support this budget for the young entrepreneur in Black Village. I support this budget for the young men in Rock Crusher trying to start their businesses. I support this budget for the single mother in Oakesfield. Mr. Speaker, I support this budget because I love my country, I love the Bahamian people. I support this budget, Mr. Speaker, because the Bahamas must succeed. May God bless the people of St. Barnabas, Bahamians everywhere, wherever they may be it land or sea, and may God continue to richly bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many The chair recognizes the honorable member for Central and South Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the good and industrious people of Central and South Abaco, who I have the distinguished privilege and pleasure of representing in this honorable House. But before I move into my contribution, Mr. Speaker, I have the very sad task of acknowledging the passing of Miss Vashti Albury of Cherokee Sound, who was a beloved community pillar. As a representative, I mourn the passing of a great Abaconian, and as a person, I mourn the passing of a wonderful individual. And to all of her family, especially her daughters, I want you to know that you have my sincerest condolences and that my thoughts and prayers will be with you and your family throughout this difficult time. It has been a little over a year, Mr. Speaker, since I was elected to represent my home island as their Member of Parliament. I feel ever grateful, emboldened, as well as humbled by their vestige of trust in me. I have never forgotten, nor will I ever forget, Mr. Speaker, that I work for them. Mr. Speaker, before going into the budget proper, I would like to address some matters as they pertain to my constituency. I genuinely believe, Mr. Speaker, that my constituency is one of the most loyal and generous in our great Commonwealth, and it continues to loyally make generous contributions to the Treasury every day. Mr. Speaker, I would not be a good representative of my people if I did not do my utmost to ensure that that loyalty and generosity remains reciprocal, and to petition for the advancement and empowerment of my constituency at every turn. If I were to be forced, Mr. Speaker, to boil down my constituency's main issues to one single word, if I were to be forced, Mr. Speaker, it would be this: infrastructure. Abaco has fallen behind infrastructurally without a doubt. Throughout the length and breadth of my constituency, you will find surefire signs of infrastructural decay and neglect. Mr. Speaker, I fear I would rapidly eat up my time if I were to address all that I know of individually and specifically. Yeah. But it is more than suffice to say that we face major and minor challenges to the state of our public assets. But several stand out as particularly urgent to me, Mr. Speaker, which I would like to address. I must point out, Mr. Speaker, the condition of the Ernestine Highway heading south, particularly the section between the Marsh Harbor Roundabout and Spring City, which has not so affectionately been nicknamed the Washboard Road. In addition to what is continuing commuter traffic, Mr. Speaker, the highway sees multiple daily trips by large, heavy vehicles, which we all know erode the conditions of our infrastructure that much quicker than smaller personal vehicles, such as dump trucks on their way to the Snake Key dump site, and fully loaded fuel trucks, which make multiple daily trips on their way to the Wilson City power plant. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we are not just talking about discomfort or inconvenience when I address this issue, but rather the ever-present threat of an environmental disaster that increases every day as the condition of the road worsens. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will admit unabashedly that I love my constituency from the north end of Guanakee to Hole in the Wall and everything that happens to fall in between. But I must confess, Mr. Speaker, that my childhood home of Hopetown holds a very special place in my heart. It stands as a unique tourism mecca that continues to trend ever upwards in popularity with visitors and second homeowners. This is why I must, Mr. Speaker, excuse me, I must fight on their behalf for the urgent attention to and repair of what we have known to call the Dune Road. The road sits at a very critical juncture on the island, with the beach and ocean on one side and the mangroves and the sea on the other. It has been consistently eroding and deteriorating since Hurricane Floyd. And despite the best efforts of the locals and both the local population and the local government resources to maintain it, there's only so much they've been able to do. Therefore, I must implore the government, Mr. Speaker, that Hopetown and Abaco, my entire constituency, has given and continues to give its best to the nation, and I am very hopeful and optimistic that it will be repaid in kind. The current state of our infrastructure, of course, Mr. Speaker, is not reflective of the needs of what must be rapidly becoming, if it is not already, the largest economy outside of the capital itself. And although, Mr. Speaker, the plethora of issues frustrates and challenges myself and my constituents, I admit I do not feel overly panicked in any of these regards. Mr. Speaker, I say that because sitting at the helm of the Ministry of Public Works is the member for Carmichael. The member, Mr. Speaker, is someone as I count as a personal friend and confidant, and as a young Bahamian new into frontline politics, I admit I view him as a role model for an elected office. He had visited Abaco with me, Mr. Speaker, not too long ago, and if I'm correct, I believe Abaco was the first family island he visited in his capacity as Minister of Public Works. And at every step of the way, he was focused and thoughtful in hearing and seeing for himself the major concerns and challenges facing my constituency. Mr. Speaker, that is why I know when the member of Carmichael says he will do his utmost to bring relief and assistance, that is a bankable statement. And, Mr. Speaker, and in areas where he may not have been able to assist or bring relief, as we may have hoped, I rest comfortably in the knowledge that it is only so because it was entirely outside of his human capability to accomplish it. However, Mr. Speaker, when speaking to infrastructural challenges and Abaco, there is one particular area I must take a few minutes out of my time to address very specifically. This area, of course, being the ongoing challenges of power generation and supply in Abaco. For years, Mr. Speaker, Abaco has struggled and suffered in the face of mass outages, voltage problems, uncertainty, and unestimatable losses of revenue of their businesses and personal damage. I am very saddened, Mr. Speaker, to say that this issue has persisted with such uncertainty and for so long that many Abaconians have frankly given up hope that they'll see improvement in any meaningful way. Mr. Speaker, this issue has never, since being elected, left the very top of my priority list. And through you today here, Mr. Speaker, I wish to reassure all of my constituents that no matter how long it takes or what obstacles are thrown in the way, I will continue to utilize all the influence and authority of my elected office to make sure that we can keep the lights on. Now, if my recollection serves, Mr. Speaker, which I believe it does. I spoke on this very same subject in my first contribution to last year's budget. And although, Mr. Speaker, issues and problems and challenges are still very much present, I must confess I feel much better about our situation now than I did a year ago. If you'll forgive a somewhat crude analogy, Mr. Speaker, the process has finally begun in earnest of tearing off long present Band-Aids from wounds that we now know have really needed stitches all along. To give a prime example, Mr. Speaker, but by no means the only example, to give you an idea of what I'm addressing here today, it was recently discovered by the new team on the ground, the new elements on the ground in Abaco, that the Wilson City Power Plant, the main power generation facility on the island of Abaco, was never fully commissioned by Man Diesel. It had never been fully commissioned before coming into operation. That and other obstacles, and you can imagine the uphill battle that we are facing. Mr. Speaker, I made a commitment to myself and to others early on to be honest and direct, even if those principles and those commitments earn the ire and deriding comment of others. The truth is, we still appear to be some ways out from getting where we need to be. But I commend the changes that were necessary to bring the technical experience and the executive leadership to address this most critical issue on the island of Abaco, Mr. Speaker. And I must rest confident that I feel the passing of time will vindicate the reason for these changes. Mr. Speaker, moving on, I would be absolutely remiss if I did not also address the very sensitive but very important issue of the presence of shantytowns in my constituency. There exist, Mr. Speaker, two major shantytowns in my constituency, known as the Mud and the Pigeon Pea, respectively, as well as the existence of a smaller shantytown on the island of Hopetown. Mr. Speaker, I must state here today that I believe historically, traditionally, the way we've always spoken about these things is fundamentally wrong. What are the kind of things we say, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about this? What do we say? Blame immigration. They're not doing their job. Blame works for not enforcing building codes and rules. Blame the member of parliament, whoever that may be at the time, for not fighting personally hard enough. Blame the government of the day for the lack of the political will to take on such a naturally controversial issue. Blame the opposition of the day for stoking the coals of a very sensitive issue for political expediency or points. Blame illegal residents for being there in the first place. Blame Bahamians themselves for tolerating the presence of shantytowns for so long and employing illegal residents. But, Mr. Speaker, I must assert that nowhere, although there are valid concerns and criticisms, but nowhere among those castigations and those rattling of blame game do I believe lies a real solution. I have said before on several occasions, Mr. Speaker, and I will continue to say, this is not an X or Y problem. It's our problem, and we have to deal with it together. Of course, Mr. Speaker, issues such as these must be dealt with firmly and decisively when policy decisions are made. Without follow-through, there can be no progress. But we also have to remember the very important humane element that will always remain inseparable from this issue. And, Mr. Speaker, we are all very much aware that a nationwide task force has been formed and is being helmed by Senator the Honorable Dion Fowlkes, Minister for Labor. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to make clear, not only for my constituents but for the nation as well, that there also exists a task force on the ground in Abaco, made up of both government officials and members of civil society. They have been charged with the task of creating a comprehensive, local policy solution. And I will continue to support them and work with them as they move forward in addressing this. Mr. Speaker, on one last note on that, through you, I will say to all Abaconians and all of my constituents, we have previously called on successive governments of the past to do something, anything, that will show a real commitment and make real steps in addressing this issue. So, Mr. Speaker, I will continue to say through you, now that we are finally at the doorstep of progress, please do not withdraw your support and your commitment now. We will need your collaboration. We will need your consultation. And yes, we will need your criticisms. We have to be in this together, or we might as well not be in it at all, Mr. Speaker. So I would appreciate you allowing me to, through you, urge that to all. Mr. Speaker, on a few other notes, I would also like to take the time and the opportunity to urge the government to please utilize some extra care, caution, and attention when it comes to the Marsh Harbor Port Facility, which has had several close calls in the past in terms of meeting criteria for its international shipping requirements. It's an important lifeline to the success and livelihood of my constituency and my constituents. And the loss or reduction of its services would catastrophically damage Abaco and its economy. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to request that the ability and the equipment to print and issue driver's license in the Road Traffic Department office in Marsh Harbor to please be addressed as quickly as humanly possible. Mr. Speaker, I know, speaking in the grand scale of things that we often address in this House, an issue like this may appear to be a small thing, but these are the things that are incredibly vexating and difficult for the residents and my constituents. So I would ask, I know I've spoken with the member for Southern Shores in his capacity as minister responsible, and I know he is working and doing all he can for us on this regard. But I would be remiss as a representative if I did not take the opportunity to stress again a solution to this vexating problem be accomplished as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, of course, as a representative, as a member of Parliament, in addition to bringing forth important issues pertaining to my constituency in this House, I also have the privilege of speaking to some of the activities and goals that I've accomplished in my constituency over this past year. I recently held and awarded the first ever Central and South Abaco MP essay competition, which was open to all students in my constituency between the ages of 15 to 18, where they were to write collegiate level essays, properly written and resourced, on a number of topics that pertain to Bahamian history, culture, and governance. And I must state that I was completely impressed and blown away by the quality of the submissions I received. I'm very proud of all of the students who have submitted entries, and you have my commitment, Mr. Speaker, they have my commitment that will continue next year in a bigger scale. Mr. Speaker, something I was very proud to do, Mr. Speaker, and this was actually quite recently. In my constituency, there is a school, Every Child Counts, which is a school for the learning impaired and the differently abled. And they provide education to those who do not have the means to look after those who are so challenged. Recently, Mr. Speaker, I was able to make a contribution towards the completion of the assisted living facility, which they are building to provide a safe and accommodating environment for their graduates who are severely challenged but do not have the means or ways of acquiring intensive private care. There are those in our society, Mr. Speaker, who work so very hard to keep the fabric of our communities together, and they often go criminally under-celebrated, and they never seek the spotlight or expressions of gratitude for their hard work and their good works, but because they know it's the right thing to do. So it was my absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to make a contribution to such a worthy goal that I know not only touches so many families in my constituency, but as a matter of fact throughout the island of Abaco and nationwide. Nationwide, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, I've tried to be as active as possible in terms of assisting local schools with defraying costs for school field trips, some critical infrastructure and developments. And I will say here today in this House, Mr. Speaker, as a way to conveying to my constituents on a public scale, I will always be open about where and how my capital grant is expended. And I'll always be clear and open with that, and I can justify every decision to maximize the effect and the improvement of my constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn briefly now and speak on my portfolio as a parliamentary secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister in Abaco. Mr. Speaker, the member for Killarney, in his capacity as Prime Minister, made the commitment at the start of the term to hold office in the Abaco office of the Prime Minister once a month to meet with residents, constituents, and address other areas of concern. Mr. Speaker, allow me to segue really quick here and just state that I think this represents an important fundamental shift in what's kind of been a traditional Bahamian political philosophy. No longer must my constituents or our issues feel like we must bring them to Nassau or bring them to the capital, but rather that our Prime Minister will come to us. I think that's a very commendable decision, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to report through you to my constituents that barring an odd, rare exception for extenuating circumstance, the member for Killarney has kept that commitment in full. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made numerous other visits outside of his fixed scheduled visits to address other pertinent and special issues on the island. To give you a prime example, Mr. Speaker, recently the member for Killarney, along with the members for North Abaco and Marathon in their respective ministerial capacities, visited Abaco to move forward with the government's much-discussed policy for providing accessible and affordable residential service lots for potential Bahamian property and landowners, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, at this point, to state that during the same exercise, the Prime Minister visited the communities of Crossing Rocks and Spring City. In Crossing Rocks, the government has committed to resolving a 2-decade-long community travesty, wherein many families never received clear title to parcels of land that they were offered at motivational prices by the government to compensate for the destruction of their original homesteads in the wake of Hurricane Floyd. Unfortunately, quite unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, due to the destruction, damage, and loss of administrative records and in the subsequent hurricane, most persons were unable to prove or produce receipts of payments that they had been making on these lots, although many, based on the agreement, had already gone forward and built new family homes on the land where they continue to live today and raise families. The issue then found itself, Mr. Speaker, for lack of any more appropriate term, on the back burner. And most ashamedly, Mr. Speaker, it's been reported to me directly from my constituents in the area that the promise of getting people straight with their land has been used as a political tool and leverage during election times in the past. Mr. Speaker, I don't want that to be an election time goal. I want that to be an administration goal in the here and now. Mr. Speaker, in the case of Spring City, there are at this moment 18 unfinished homes under the care of the Department of Housing. It is a great shame, Mr. Speaker, that they have sat unused and unfinished what is now going on several years. These homes were to be completed by the awarded contractors, but for in some case, unclear reasons, they are left in their current sad state. Some of these homes, Mr. Speaker, in addition to already being assigned to potential future homeowners, were already mortgaged. Already mortgaged, Mr. Speaker. So you had new, hopeful homeowners. Homeownership, the cornerstone of wealth and success for citizens. Mr. Speaker, you had, and in some cases still have, persons, families, who are paying on a mortgage for a home they have never been able to step a foot into. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister has made his commitment to do all within his power and the power of his government to comprehensively address and resolve both of these issues.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the issue of land ownership in Crossing Rocks will be fixed. The homes in Spring City will be completed or dealt with appropriately. And I commend and I thank the Prime Minister for his attention and his commitment to these very important and critical matters for my constituents. You know, Mr. Speaker, much like my colleague, the member for Yamacraw, who actually happens to be on my right today, I was looking for you over there. My time, short as it is at this point, in political life, has made me an avid believer and proponent for the need of land reform and modernization in this country. On a daily basis, Mr. Speaker, daily basis, the Abaco office of the Prime Minister is visited by persons inquiring about Crown land. Whether they are newly applying and hopeful or are following up on matters that are long outstanding. I say long outstanding, Mr. Speaker, because I have been approached and met with several persons who have unresolved land matters stretching back literal decades, plural, more than 20 years, that they have been awaiting final resolution on. Mr. Speaker, this issue is not a political issue for me in any sense. This is a government issue. This is an efficiency issue. And this is not to castigate, Mr. Speaker, what I am certain are the very hard-working personnel in the Department of Lands and Surveys and the Land Unit. However, Mr. Speaker, it is very clear to me, at any rate, that we are in serious need of utilizing new technologies and new techniques to streamline and modernize how we handle and process land matters and ownership in this country. I must also, Mr. Speaker, highlight the presence and success of the Antiquities, Monuments, and Museum Corporation in Abaco. Mr. Speaker, the Abaco team is small in number, but it has been a trailblazer in research projects, particularly in Abaco's Blue Hole and other cave systems, which have produced groundbreaking and fascinating archaeological, scientific, and historical discoveries. They have also created, Mr. Speaker, the country's first and only, I'll be very clear so people don't, so I'm not cast with ignorance after the fact, Mr. Speaker, be very clear, country's first and only Bahamian natural history exhibit, which, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself has visited the exhibit, and I encourage all members of this House, if they happen to be in Abaco again, to please visit the exhibit. It is a very wonderful, successful piece of our natural history that has fascinated many students in my constituency and continues to draw and entertain. Mr. Speaker, I'll now like to turn and speak to the budget itself. Mr. Speaker, the unfortunate events, Mr. Speaker, I do not profess to have an education or degree in macroeconomics, Mr. Speaker. But even with a layman's understanding, such as my own, if you were to listen to the facts and the explanations as they were laid out by the Minister of Finance in his communications, with an objective and open mind, you would understand clearly the situation we are in and the measures we have been forced to take to rectify it. Mr. Speaker, the very unfortunate events that have unfolded in our regional neighbor, Barbados, should serve as a sobering reality check for all of us. The new administration of Barbados is now faced with an IMF bailout due to excessive spending and borrowing by their predecessors. They'll be forced.
Stay focused, my brother.
It's a very important point, Mr. Speaker. They will be forced to make concessions of economic control and will undoubtedly, Mr. Speaker, be implementing stringent austerity measures in order to be able to refinance and restructure their debts. Mr. Speaker, the thing about borrowing and loaning is that many people do not think of borrowing money as a form of taxation. And allow me to speak a little bit further, Mr. Speaker, so I can provide some context as to what I'm getting at here. Mr. Speaker, as individuals, as families, individuals and businesses, we go to financial institutions and we secure loans for purchasing a car or a home or to start a business. And, of course, we agree to make certain payments based on a payment plan with interest based on the money we borrowed to accomplish the goal that we had set out for ourselves. The difference is, Mr. Speaker, the very crucial difference is when we are talking about borrowing as a government or as a nation, when you borrow and borrow excessively, what you are effectively creating is a tax. But not a tax on you, not a tax on the policymakers of the day, but on your children and on your grandchildren. And all you can do, Mr. Speaker, all you can do is hope that whenever the day comes when you can no longer borrow effectively to keep going on or even borrow at all, that the citizens of tomorrow will be able to handle that burden somehow. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe this government is going to take that risk for the Bahamians of tomorrow. We must act now. We have proved the resolve and fortitude to act now. If you will forgive a touch of melodrama, Mr. Speaker, an unfortunate reality of life in general is that the right thing to do and the popular thing to do not often intersect. Mr. Speaker, the rise in value-added tax has caused what is a justified outcry of concern and frustration. You have heard it from others during this debate, and I'm sure you'll continue to hear that this is an unfortunate and regrettable action and path we've been forced to take. Especially regrettable, Mr. Speaker, because if our finances and economy had been better managed by the previous administration, this may not at all have been necessary in the first place. Mr. Speaker, throughout the remainder of this debate, primarily from the members of the Cabinet with their responsibilities and portfolios, you will hear in much greater detail what the budget means for various areas of our society and this government. But, Mr. Speaker, in particular interest to myself and my constituents is, of course, the continuation of the Family Island Encouragement Act, provisions for the continued implementation of the Freedom of Information Act, and the Catastrophic Healthcare Initiative and Plan. Speaker, I'd like to touch on that one quite quickly because that is I recently had a long and frankly a very emotional phone call with a constituent. There had been a recent vehicle accident which tragically cost the life of one and seriously injured two others. She was the mother of one of those severely injured. And we spoke on the phone at great length and great detail about the hardship and frustration her family went through in acquiring the care and attention they needed, as of course they were required to be flown out to Nassau for more intense medical care. And, Mr. Speaker, let me just take the opportunity to say that transporting medical patients from one facility to another for further treatment or even more intensive treatment is not unique to us. It happens in the most developed countries, Mr. Speaker, but we have one unfortunate area where, as a nation, as an archipelago, sometimes an air ambulance is needed where in another country a ride by traditional ambulance might do. So, Mr. Speaker, I say all that to say, when you have a family member, a loved one, an individual who is in dire need of that next critical step, they need that attention now. The last thing they or any of their family members need to be concerned about is, can I afford to save this person's life? Mr. Speaker, this initiative and this plan will address issues like these so that nobody will have to worry about the cost of saving a life again, Mr. Speaker. And I'm certain the member for Elizabeth, in his capacity as Minister of Health, would speak on that in greater detail. Mr. Speaker, of course, there's also the removal of value-added tax on breadbasket items and medicine, which was a manifesto promise which is now realized. And of course, Mr. Speaker, as we heard from the member for East Grand Bahama, that items will continue to be reviewed and potentially added to this list of value-added tax exempted items to continue making life easier and more affordable for not only the struggling, but the average Bahamian, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to all of my constituents, by extension, to all Bahamians, I would please ask and encourage all of you to follow this budget debate and all the subsequent information to follow. So please watch and pay attention to it all in the greatest of detail. I am certain, Mr. Speaker, a careful and calm approach would leave most to understand a satisfactory justification of why we have taken the measures we have taken with this upcoming financial budget. Mr. Speaker, before I go to bring my contribution towards a close, there is an area I am very, very passionate about. With your indulgence, I would like to speak on. That area is constituency service reform. Mr. Speaker, what I mean when I say constituency service reform is something that has been a bit of a pet project or passion project of mine, is as an individual, as an elected representative, how do we reach that next level of exceptional representation and good constituency service? Mr. Speaker, let me state again so the answer will reflect correctly what I said, just in case. The word I used was exceptional and not acceptable. Mr. Speaker, I believe all those who sit in this House today and have sat in the House previously could speak to the frustration and disappointment and challenges it faces as a single individual to try and accurately and diligently follow up and represent, provide good constituency service to what may number anywhere between 2,000 to 5,000 constituents. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, it may be just as frustrating on both sides of the proverbial fence, where you have constituents become increasingly frustrated by the time constraints and abilities, physical capabilities of the Member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians are, generally speaking, a highly politically engaged and involved people, and their expectations of their elected officials and public servants is correspondingly high. We must follow suit, Mr. Speaker, in modernizing and adapting our structure to better equip ourselves to serve our constituents and our communities. In many jurisdictions, both regionally and around the globe, Mr. Speaker, including Trinidad and Tobago, Canada, the United Kingdom, just to name several, provisions are made in budgets for members of Parliament to employ professional staff who assist them in parliamentary and constituency responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, before I continue on any further on this topic, and leave myself open to future aspersions of ignorance, let me clarify that I am well aware that there is an existing office stipend of $30,000 a year for members of Parliament to maintain a constituency office. While at first instance, Mr. Speaker, this may sound like a large or considerable amount of money, by the time a Member of Parliament hires a receptionist or a secretary, rents a suitable office space, pays overhead running and operational costs, including utilities, stationery, etc., there's very little, if anything at all, left over or remaining to improve or expand your constituency services. Please, Mr. Speaker, let me affirm that every Member of Parliament must and should be using the existing fund to the best of their ability to maintain a functioning constituency office and facilitate services. However, Mr. Speaker, the existing amount is not sufficient to reach the new heights and levels of service that our constituents demand and deserve. The personnel... Mr. Speaker, following along with, like I said, it's become a little bit of a passion project of mine, and I've done quite a bit of independent research on this. Looking at other jurisdictions, examples of personnel that other jurisdictions employ, they go beyond reception or secretarial work, of course, but rather they are more akin to qualified professionals who, like the Member of Parliament, is responsible and dedicated to providing good constituency services. Some examples include caseworkers who assist the Member of Parliament in addressing and resolving issues brought forward by constituents, working on behalf of, and in some cases with the authority of, the MP, and directly coordinating and communicating with government agencies and other bodies to bring relief and resolution for constituents. Another example includes parliamentary researchers who assist the MP with diligent and thorough research and review of important topics and critical matters before Parliament so they can make the most well-informed decisions on behalf of their constituents. Mr. Speaker, these are not, or would not, rather, just be free-for-all positions that could be used as a tool for political or personal favors. There should be predefined, established job roles and expectations with minimum mandatory requirements and qualifications, as well as corresponding pay scales. This is not rocket science at all, Mr. Speaker. We do this today with the public service. Mr. Speaker, these parameters would prevent anomalous situations where you have one member of parliament who is paying their staff member $30,000 a year, while another member of parliament may be paying their staff member who is performing the same job role $60,000 a year. Mr. Speaker, I also genuinely and truly believe that this would also be a measure to ensure equality to all members of this House, whether they are a minister or a backbencher, a member of the government or a member of the opposition, and regardless of the member's individual wealth or means. All members would now have the means for equitable access to qualified personnel and resources. Mr. Speaker, what I'm talking about here today is not unusual or excessive in any way. In fact, such provisions are commonplace and standard practice throughout most directly elected representative democracies the world over. We are well aware, Mr. Speaker, as we have thoroughly covered and will continue to cover, the financial and economic situation we are currently in, and the need for care, caution, and most importantly, common sense with our public expenditure. Mr. Speaker, I say all this fully understanding that the provisions I'm speaking of, if they ever were to be adopted or implemented, would of course add to recurring expenditures. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, I believe such provisions would create a fundamental paradigm shift and improvement in our deliverability and performance as elected representatives. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the simpler arrangements of yesteryear will no longer do. They no longer suffice for the needs, the demands, and the entitlements that we owe to the modern electorate. And we must adapt and follow suit. I would therefore humbly suggest, on the floor, Mr. Speaker, humbly suggest that moving forward in future budgets, that the government would seriously consider creating provisions for such allocations in future budgets to achieve this fundamental, to me, Mr. Speaker, quite honestly, I'll speak very personally, to me, this fundamental change that we must undertake. Mr. Speaker, we are at a very critical juncture now as a nation and a society, as a government. The member for Killarney in his capacity as Prime Minister, as well as the member for East Grand Bahama, of course, in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, and all the members of the Cabinet, and by extension, of course, the members of this Parliament. We must now act, and act what is, in what is very many ways, in unpopular and, at this point, slightly misunderstood ways. But we have to do the right thing, Mr. Speaker. It's not just about us, Mr. Speaker. It's about future generations and the stability and the continued life of our great nation. Without these measures, I truly fear to the depths of what we might sink. Therefore, I commend the leadership for having the fortitude and the deliverability to accomplish this and take these measures. And I have the fullest confidence that it will be done responsibly and honestly, openly, to the benefit of all Bahamians throughout our great Commonwealth. Mr. Speaker, Central and South Abaco supports the 2018-2019 budget. And may God bless you, Mr. Speaker, and may God continue to bless the great Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Exumas and Ragged Island. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, as per our agreement with the official opposition, we're going to break at this point in time and come back at 3 o'clock. And so I do move that the House do suspend and us come back at 3.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.